Hi, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on SI and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider podcast, joined today by one of my dear buddies. This is the great Matt Hladek from thespun.com. We've been doing podcasts together and radio broadcasts and all of that for long. Matt, help me here now. Rutgers joined the Big Ten when?
2012, so it's been since then.
Wow, 13 years.
Yeah.
So starting our 13th year. Wow. All right, let's dig right into it. It's a new beginning for Raider Nation. Pete Carroll, as you know, I've been doing this for 3 decades. I've been around so many great coaches and championship teams. I've never seen anything like him. He's a unicorn. He is everything that he has been billed to be. I'd love your thoughts on Pete Carroll.
Sure, and I think obviously, we'll start to see the proof in the pudding when the season starts, but I think you're excited if you're a Raider fan. From afar, it seems like, this summer, the kind of atmosphere around the team and everything was a lot different. And it was, it was a different vibe. It was a different kind of, a new sheriff was in town. And I think that, like I've said before, the two biggest reasons why, if you're a Raider fan, you should be a little optimistic about this year is that you have a coach and you have a quarterback. And I think that those are the two most important positions in football by far. And now you finally have some potential stability there. And you have a guy who has proven himself to be one of the best coaches in the NFL and a guy who I think is one of the top 10 to 12 quarterbacks in the NFL. So it's a good place to start.
For you, when you've watched the Raiders from a distance, and by the way, Matt's a terrific writer for Men's Journal. He's been a longtime sports writer. When you watch the Raiders, the thing that hit me was there was not the discombobulation. It wasn't, I mean, yes, Jakobi Meyers asked for a trade, but there was no drama with it. He was there. He showed up. He's not holding out. It was not your typical Raiders. And one thing, I'll never forget this. When I moved to Vegas to cover the Raiders 6 years ago, I was told by multiple friends in the NFL, drama follows them. So get ready. You'll always have something to write about because there's always drama. And it's been, Pete Carroll got here and it just slowed down, and now it's just been normal football. It's been like covering a normal team. It's actually a little bit refreshing. Have you noticed that?
For sure. I think, there's not, like you said, there was the little bit of, Jakobi Meyers asking for a trade, but, there wasn't what's going to happen with the star player. And, there wasn't a big contract dispute. There wasn't, it hasn't been anything off field. There really has been all about business. And I think that's a refreshing change of pace for the Raiders. And now I think you'll get a chance to see what does a Pete Carroll Raiders team look like when the games start for real. And I'm excited to see, just from an observational standpoint, what he's able to do because he's in a tough spot. The division's very good. It's a really tough division. But I feel like, if you had previous regimes still in place, and I say regimes, I'm not just talking about Antonio Pearson and who Pete Carroll replaced. I'm talking about, the guys before Antonio Pierce. I'm talking about, McDaniels and all. I mean, if you had previous regimes with this group of coaches and executives in the AFC West, you would feel like you're way behind. And I think now, if you're the Raiders, you might think, okay, we got some catching up to do, but we have the people in place to potentially do it.
You have been a big proponent of Geno Smith, as I have. Even before he got here, I was a big proponent. I thought he was underrated. I think sometimes we throw quarterbacks away way too quick. Geno was not good when he was young, but got where Pete believed in him, and Pete was like, "Okay, go over there, sit down, take a deep breath, and learn." You thought this was a great pickup by the Raiders. I agree with you. What is it about Geno that you bought into even before he was a Raider?
Well, I think before you even get into actual football stuff, I think he's kind of been through it all and he's seen it all. I mean, he was a second round pick coming out of West Virginia to the Jets. And obviously, he wasn't, a top 10 pick, but he's a guy that Jets fans had some hope for. Can it finally be our quarterback? And it didn't work out. He wasn't good. The situation with the organization was probably even worse. And, it looked like his career, he was going to be out of football almost. And then he was with the Giants as a backup. And of course, he kind of got blamed unfairly for taking over for Eli Manning when his start streak broke. That wasn't his fault. That was Ben McAdoo, the coach's decision. And I think people kind of discarded him and thought, he's just going to be, an also-ran. But after finally settling, he went to San Diego, or maybe it might have been in LA at that point, the Chargers. But he goes to Seattle and he finds a home. He finds a guy that believes in him in Pete Carroll. And I think sometimes, that could be the difference in a quarterback being out of football or being an effective player, effective starter, is finding a coach that believes in them and is going to work with what they can do and tailor stuff to, what they're able to bring you. And now you get into the actual football stuff. I think he's really tough. I think he's very accurate. I think you saw that in Seattle when they didn't really have a great offensive line. He had to play and face the pass rush, and he took some big hits, and he can deliver with anticipation. He can throw guys open. And when he does make a mistake, he shakes it off, and he can come right back out and get you the next drive. Like I said, I think that, to me, if you're in a division with Patrick Mahomes, who's the best quarterback in football, and Justin Herbert, who on talent is probably a top 5 guy, and now you have Bo Nix, who really surprised me last year and looks like he could be a great fit with Sean Payton in Denver. You need a quarterback that can match up with those guys, or at least give you a fighting chance in those games, and Geno Smith gives you that.
Let's turn the page a little bit, and I want to ask you about Ashton Jeanty. A lot of people believed he was the best running back to come out in the draft since Saquon Barkley. And there's been some good ones. Nobody said he was Saquon, but the best since Saquon. First of all, Matt, now that I've gotten to know him, what a wonderful kid. Just a wonderful kid. In fact, as great as he is talking about football, he'd much rather talk about something other than football. Just a wonderful human being. And man, he has flashed. He has just shown some things. How excited are you as a fan of the game to watch Ashton?
I am. And I think you and I are also big college football guys. And I think you saw the drop off his alma mater had, Boise State, losing week 1 without him. That's a big, big guy to take off the field there. But looking ahead, I'm really excited because to me, I think the thing that when you talk about it, a running back like Ezekiel Elliott when he came out of Ohio State, Saquon Barkley out of Penn State, Ashton Jeanty, these are guys who are plug and play. You don't worry about giving them too much of a workload. You don't worry about if they're going to translate to the next level. You know that they're workhorses. They're playmakers. They're guys that are going to be able to carry the load. And I'm excited to see that from Ashton Jeanty. I think he's going to get ample opportunities. We know Pete Carroll loves to run the ball, always has. I think there's some potential there, even as a receiver, too. I think you get the ball in his hands. But I think I'm really excited because I think he could be an impact player for the Raiders. And I think he'll be a fun for people to play fantasy football. He'll be a very fun to have on their roster. Like, I think he's a potential to step in and already be one of the better young stars in the NFL.
He's a terrific kid, Matt. You would really like him personally. All right, let's turn direction. Let's talk about Micah Parsons. So I'm going to be flat out just brutally honest. I really like Jerry Jones. I have for a long time. I had great respect for Al Davis, but like most men who built an empire, there comes a place in the end of their career when maybe they don't know, I'm not what I used to be. He's clearly not what he used to be, and he's put that franchise in a lot of really bad spots. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy or a bad owner. I think he's great based on his collective body of work. We're just talking about the last few years. I was told by someone who I trust within the organization that Stephen Jones got involved at the end after it was irreparable. And if you look at what they got from Micah, they couldn't afford to pay him, and it just couldn't because of the mishandling of the franchise. That wasn't Stephen Jones's fault. I think they came out of this in really good shape. If I was them, I would have made that trade. I would have signed Micah before it got to that point. But so I'm not saying they should have not kept Micah, but they couldn't. So the fact that they couldn't, what they were able to get out of Green Bay, I think they came out ahead in this trade, although I think Green Bay got a great player. To me, it's almost like both teams win here. What's your thought process?
Well, I think to me, here's where if I'm a Cowboy fan, and a lot of my friends I know who are Cowboy fans, what they're feeling. To me, I think what drives you nuts is you had a guy, you draft him in the first round, homegrown, home developed, one of the best defensive players in football. And I think partially, you talked about not being able to afford it. One of the things that has killed the Cowboys in recent years, first of all, let me start by saying something that as much as we knock the Cowboys and make fun of them, one thing they've been really good at, even under Jerry Jones lately, is they draft guys well and they develop well. They have. Stephen Jones, Will McClay, that whole organization there does a great job with that. But what they haven't done a good job is the best organizations, when they have guys that are foundational pieces, they find ways to get them locked up early. That's what the Eagles do. And Eagles aren't the only one, but the Eagles, they get guys locked up early. And the Cowboys didn't do it with CeeDee Lamb, and they didn't do it with Dak Prescott, and they had to overpay. So now they had to overpay there. As good as those two guys are, and they're very good. Now you're Jerry Jones, you're thinking, well, I paid too much here, paid too much there. I just paid Dak, and he got hurt, which wasn't Dak's fault, but it's part of football. Can I afford to pay another guy as good as Micah Parsons is, big money? He wasn't comfortable going past a certain price point. But I think by not being proactive, the best things they could have done were either A, sign him early and get him locked up, or if it got to beyond that point, make the decision early in the offseason that we don't think we can do this. And then you try to work on a trade, because I think they could have gotten even more. They got 2 firsts and Kenny Clark, who's going to be 30, still very productive defensive lineman. I think they could have gotten 2 firsts, a productive player, and maybe some additional assets. I don't know if they could have gotten the full Herschel Walker trade, 3 firsts and 3 seconds and all of that, but they could have gotten 2 firsts, a player, and maybe a couple of day 2 picks, things like that. You could have added to the mix if they had opened it up earlier in the offseason, because you would have had more teams clearing assets and clearing cap space to make a run at Micah Parsons. So I think what's killed the Cowboys under Jerry Jones recently is they're not proactive enough. They aren't looking to get their guys under contract and move forward with them early enough. And it's killing them. And it's made them have to overpay for Dak and CeeDee, and it's made them contributed to them having to trade, or feeling like they had to trade, one of the better defensive players in football.
Yeah, I agree. I think they could have got more, but I'm saying I'm crediting Steven for jumping in and saving it. And
listen, when Jerry Jones passes away, and if Stephen Jones is running the show there, I think the Cowboys are in good hands with him.
Very good.
I do.
Hands.
I think Stephen Jones knows what he's doing. I just think that, Jerry is still Jerry. And, as you mentioned, he's a guy who early in his career was a maverick in terms of how he bought the team and, hiring Jimmy Johnson and all those things, and it paid off in spades. But now it's kind of, when you get to that point, you don't realize you aren't what you were, and you don't know what you don't know. And that's what's kind of sad if you're a Cowboy fan.
Totally agree with you, 100%. All right, so let's parlay this and go on to Jakobi Meyers. So here's how I feel about Jakobi, and you tell me if you disagree. He is the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL. There's no diva. Didn't drop a pass last year. He's got guaranteed money, so there's that 1 year left. But at the end of the year, the Raiders are either going to have to let him walk, franchise him, or they're going to pay him more than they would have had to pay this year. So if I'm sitting here today and I'm the Raiders, and I don't want to keep him. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to keep him. I'm just going to keep him for 1 year. Then you trade him now. It's not a Super Bowl year, so you get some type of compensation.
Mhm.
And so if you're not sure, I don't know how you can't be, but if you're not sure, okay, then you're going to have to overpay either with a contract or franchising him. To me, this is walking a very tightrope because if you franchise him, you're going to pay him more than it would cost you now to give him 2 more years. This is just going to be dangerous how this works out. And you know what? If he gets injured, if he has a bad year, then the Raiders look like geniuses. If he doesn't get injured, which he's not injury prone, and he doesn't have a bad year, and as long as they don't underutilize him, I don't think he will. This is potential. And I'm saying it now so that if it happens and he ends up walking away or they have to overpay, I'm going to be very critical of the franchise. And if they don't, I'm going to give them all the credit in the world. Where's your thought process on this Jakobi thing?
The other option, which would really be threading the needle here, and this is where you have to hope he doesn't get banged up or something like that, is if you keep him for the first 6-7 weeks of the season and tell him, listen, at the deadline, if you're still feeling this way, at the deadline, you could maybe move him then, because teams will be looking for veteran receiver help mid-season.
Okay, but here's my point. If you trade him at the trade deadline, you're not going to get as much as you would have gotten.
No, you're not. That's exactly. Now, if you look at the original 53-man roster, only 5 receivers made it. That's really light. And you got Dante Thornton, Trey Tucker, Jack Besh. Besh and Thornton obviously rookies. Trey Tucker's still pretty young. They signed Amari Cooper, who's a veteran presence, can still play a little bit, but he's not the Amari Cooper that you had when he was with the Raiders the first time around. So if you do trade Jakobi Meyers now, you're very thin at receiver. Obviously, you have probably the best tight end in football and one of the best running backs already, I think, as a rookie. So you're covered there, and you do have a good quarterback. But you would have to make some contingency plans at receiver. But it's like you said, if you have a guy who, if you don't think he's going to be a long-term fixture of your team, you might have to say, let's trade him now. And there are some teams that have been reported that are sniffing around about veteran receivers that want to wide receiver too.
I know for a fact that there have been contact, and the Raiders are like, no, we have no desire to move him. And I don't blame the Raiders. I don't think they should move him. I think you go and give him a 2-year extension so his 1-year deal becomes 3. And then by the time 3 years from now, these 2 rookie receivers are going into their 4th year. You know what you have. To me, listen, if this works out, I'm going to praise Spytek from the heavens. But if it doesn't, I'm going to be very critical. And I think it's fair to say this in advance so it doesn't look like I'm doing 20/20 hindsight.
For sure. I think you got to think out, and I think these are the conversations that teams have. They have to think ahead, not just for this year, but for 2026 and beyond. What do we do? How can we, how do we balance this out? Because the Raiders know this is not a Super Bowl year. This is a building year. And you want to see these young players, and I believe they really like these young players, obviously. But you also have to think, okay, how do we compete so at least we're putting a good enough product on the field and we're doing right by our quarterback, we're doing right by our offense. But does that mean we keep a guy in Jakobi Meyers who maybe we're thinking we don't know about his long-term place within the team? It's a balance. This is the type of stuff, and this is why they pay, your John Spytek's big money. This is why they're in charge of running all this stuff, because these are the decisions that impact the franchise.
Letting Robert Spillane go was a terrible decision by the Raiders, but I don't blame Spytek. It was a terrible decision by the Raiders because there had been so much inconsistency within the franchise. He slipped through the cracks. I don't blame John Spytek for that one bit. This situation is clearly under the microscope. We're going to learn a lot about him as a leader from this.
For sure, and I think that it's a first, not a huge test, but it's a pretty big test early in his tenure, and I think you're going to see what his vision is for the team early on, and what his vision is for how he wants to run the organization by how they handle this.
I agree with you. All right, everybody. He's the great Matt Hladek from Men's Journal. Would you tell everybody how do they find you on Twitter?
Sure, you can find me at Matt Hladek 919. And now that it's football season, I'll be live tweeting the games, all the games. I'll be live tweeting some college football, anything. You can find me on there talking ball all day.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. We'll see you again real soon.
My pleasure.